WHGE 95.3 FM. Coming up, the open eye. Hey, Sherry. I see you, sister.
Those of us that indulge in or commit intellectual violence don't do so for the pleasure of mental masturbation or ego diddling. We do so because the chains of oppression on our people's minds are deep and difficult to remove.
Good morning, my children of the sun. Welcome to the Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm your host, third eye optometrist, Patrice Gibbs, and speaking of what's going on with the sound in here, okay. All right, here to get that third eye open, and as we always start, every generation has its purpose. Ours is to reveal the truth and reverse the brainwashing. And we do that right here. Let me get my disclaimer out the way before I move on with my opening commentary. Okay.
The views and opinions expressed on the Open Eye are those of the hosts, guests, and contributors, and do not reflect the policy or position of WHGE 95.3 FM, nor our sponsor, the Delaware Center for Homeless Vets. Any content provided by Open Eye's hosts, guests, or contributors are theirs and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, company, or individual.
All right. Let's keep on moving here. All right. Let me ask you something before we even get comfortable. What happens when power no longer bothers to hide what it's doing? Not soften it, not spin it, not disguise it behind polished language and press conferences. What happens when it just does it out loud? Because that's where we are. We are watching a government that can fire generals for hesitation, escalate wars without strategy, and make decisions that ripple across the globe while telling you everything is under control. We are watching systems where profit margins can matter more than human life, where decisions that shape the fate of nations are made with the same casual recklessness as a bad business deal. And the most dangerous part of it, it's not the chaos, it's the normalization. Because once people get used to instability, once absurdity becomes routine, once contradiction becomes just another headline, then anything becomes possible. You can declare victory and defeat in the same breath. You can claim strength while creating weakness. You can wrap confusion and confidence and call it leadership. And if the people stop demanding clarity, stop demanding accountability, stop demanding truth, then power no longer has to make sense. It only has to exist. So today, we're not just looking at what's happening. We're asking a deeper question. Are we witnessing disorder? Or are we witnessing a system that has decided it no longer needs to pretend? Because those are the two very different realities. And only one of them can be challenged. All right. Harmon left this article for the host. What you should do if ICE violates your rights. Do you believe your rights are being violated by U.S. immigration and customs agents enforcement, or witness someone else's rights being violated? There are steps you can take to seek justice. At a recent Speak Out Against Hate community meeting in Georgetown Police Chief Ralph Holm and Seaford Police Chief Marshall Craft recommended contacting local police in such cases. You know what? I'm not going to go on with this, because ICE don't give a damn about your local police, and you ain't got enough people and firepower out there to offset them. You will find yourself in a hell of a jam. That's word. Yeah. I'm just not going to go into something that's, not based in any sense of reality. All right, Brother Vaughn, Brother Frankie, see y'all in there. Today is April 4th. April 4th, 1968. Do you remember where you were? I was 7 years old. I was on the couch. The news had just come on, and they announced the assassination of Dr. King. It's 58 years ago. There's some static going on here. Let's see, where is it? Let's see what I need to do here. Okay, I'm not going to be able to do a lot about that. Anyway, I always talk about Martin, especially in times like this, during his birthday, and of course his the date of his assassination. And one of the things that I like to bring up is what Adam Clayton Powell said about Martin. Martin does not belong to the decadent aristocratic colonialists of the civil rights movement. 58 years after his death, Dr. Martin Luther King remains a prophet well of honor in the very institution that once nurtured him, the Black church. At the time of his assassination, the majority of Black churches regarded Dr. King not as a hero, but as a troublemaker, a man whose radical insistence on justice disturbed the comfort of the pulpit and the pure light. Many ministers refused him in their pulpits. Many congregations dismissed him as too political, too confrontational, too dangerous. Today, those same institutions wrap themselves in his memory, but not his mission. They pay a ritualized homage, brief, ceremonial, and sanitized a few Sundays each year, quoting fragments of his dream while ignoring the fire of his demand. Their tributes are, in King's own words, pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious trivialities, polite, predictable, and hollow. Most of the well-known Black preachers of our time have traded the theology of liberation for the theology of accumulation. They speak of prosperity, not protest, of personal blessings, not public accountability. Liberation theology doesn't fit offering plates, and so it is left to gather dust while sermons about wealth and comfort draw applause. Dr. King called for a radical transformation of society, a redistribution of power, resources, and opportunity. And for that, he was despised by the comfortable and feared by the complicit. His true gospel was not about getting rich in Babylon, but about tearing down Babylon's walls. And until the church that raised him discovers that courage, it will continue to honor his name while betraying his legacy. This is Dove and I. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is Patrice Gibbs, your third eye optometrist right here on the Open Eye. Okay, the black tax. Got this initially from the Griot. Didn't particularly like, well, let me tell you this first. Let me say this and then I'll tell you. A recent book is making waves by claiming that the U.S. government stole over $600 billion from black Americans through discriminatory taxes in the years following slavery. I didn't like that wording there that the Griot used, by claiming. It should be by exposing. Okay, the book The Black Tax by historian Andrew W. Carl argues that unjust tax policies were a huge factor in preventing black people from building wealth after slavery ended. From inflated property tax assessments to hidden fees that led to land seizures. These laws took away opportunities for black families to thrive, forcing them into poverty and stripping away land that could have been passed down for generations. This isn't just about taxes. It's about a legacy of exploitation that stretches back for over a century. The $600 billion figure, the $600 billion figure is an estimate of what black families lost through these unfair practices. Money that could have helped close the racial wealth gap. The book not only covers this hidden history, but it also calls for reforms to help address these historical injustices. For those wondering how these practices are still impacting black Americans today, this book sheds much needed light on a deep-seated issue that continues to affect generations. The stakes. Can we reckon with the past to create a fairer future for all? And what role should the government play in correcting these past wrongs? What the black tax exposes isn't just a historical footnote, it's a system. A system that quietly extracted wealth from black communities long after slavery ended, while publicly claiming freedom had already been delivered. Let's break it down. And let's see why it matters right now. Tell you how the system works. Taxation as a weapon. After emancipation, black Americans did what people would do with a shot at freedom. They acquired land. They built homes and tried to establish generational stability. But according to Carl's research, property tax assessments were often inflated for black landowners. White-owned land was undervalued, reducing their tax burden. Delinquent taxes, even minor ones, led to land seizures. Hidden fees and penalties stacked up, making it nearly impossible to recover. This wasn't accidental. It was policy-driven. Local governments, especially in the South, rely heavily on property taxes. And black landowners, often without political protection or legal recourse, became easy targets. The result? Land that had been hard-won was systematically stripped away. The $600 billion estimate isn't just about money. It's about compounded loss. Think about this. Land equals wealth. Wealth equals inheritance. Inheritance equals opportunity. When land is taken, families lose collateral for loans. Children lose access to educational funding. Communities lose economic anchors. Over generations, that loss multiplies. That's how you get today's reality. The median white family has significantly more wealth than the median black family. Black landowners has dramatically declined since its peak in the early 20th century. This wasn't just market forces. It was engineered inequality. And this was legal. But was it legitimate? See, here's the uncomfortable truth. These practices were often completely legal under Jim Crow era governments. But legality and legitimacy are not the same thing. This is the same country where laws once enforced segregation, laws once upheld disenfranchisement, laws once protected exploitation. So the real question isn't was it legal, it's who were the laws designed to serve? And why it still matters today. Because the effect didn't end when the laws changed. They show up today in the racial wealth gap, disparities in home ownership, unequal access to capital, neighborhood disinvestment. You can't understand present inequality without understanding how wealth was extracted in the past. What now? Because that's the bigger question. Well, Karl Marx pushes into uncomfortable territory. Should there be targeted tax reforms? Should seized land or its value be restituted? Does this strengthen the case for reparations? You damn right. Because if wealth was taken through policy, then policy is one of the only tools that can address it. This isn't just about history, it's about accountability. You can't preach self-reliance to people whose wealth was systematically taken. You can't talk about bootstraps when the boots and the land they stood on were confiscated. That wasn't failure. This was interference. And the real debate isn't whether it happened. It's whether this country has the courage and the moral integrity to deal with what it did. This is the Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. All right. A daily reminder. Israelis are not Israelites. Khazars are not Semites. Ashkenazis are not Hebrews. The Talmud is not the Torah. Yiddish is not Aramaic. The satanic bankers who created the country of Israel in 1948 are imposters. They are not the real Judahites. Israel is explicitly warning Christian residents in southern Lebanon not to hide Muslim residents among them as their forces advance. Jewish troops are now searching for Muslims hiding in the attics of Christians. Let me tell you that again. Israel is explicitly warning Christian residents in southern Lebanon not to hide Muslim residents among them as their forces advance there. Jewish troops are now searching for Muslims hiding in the attics of Christians. The irony is not subtle. It's loud, it's uncomfortable, and it's staring us directly in the face. Of people whose historical trauma includes being hunted, searched for, exposed, dragged out of hiding, are now associated with actions that resemble those same patterns. And let that sit for a moment. Because history is not just something we remember. It is something we're supposed to learn from. And when the lesson is ignored, History doesn't repeat itself in extract form. It returns in familiar shapes. There was a time when survival depended on silence, on stillness, on whether a neighbor would protect you or betray you. There was a time when being found meant disappearance, when footsteps on stairs meant the difference between life and death. And in that history, etched into global memory, there was a moral line drawn in permanent ink. Those who hunted and those who hid the hunted. That line was supposed to be sacred. But power has a way of blurring lines that memory once made clear. Because once you move from being the hunted to holding power, a new test begins. Not survival, but restraint. Not endurance, but accountability. And here's where the discomfort lies. It's not just about geopolitics. It's not just about military strategy. It is about moral contradiction. Because the question that echoes across generations is simple. Excuse me. If you know what it feels like to be hunted, how do you justify becoming the hunter? Now you have someone say, oh, it's about security, about threats, about war, blah, blah, bullshit. Because history doesn't disappear just because circumstances change. Memory doesn't lose its meaning just because power shifts. And trauma, real trauma, was never meant to become a blueprint for someone else's fear. See, that's the deeper tragedy here. Because suffering is supposed to produce empathy. Oppression is supposed to produce awareness. History is supposed to produce caution, not replication. And when those who carry the memory of persecution begin to mirror its patterns, even partially, even under different justifications, it forces the world to confront an uncomfortable truth. Pain does not guarantee moral clarity. Power tests that every single time. So this moment, this image, this reality, is not about one place or one conflict. It's about a universal warning. If we do not actively guard against the lessons of history, we don't just forget them, we become them. I'm Patrice Gibbs. All right, Brother James, I see you there. Thanks for tuning in there, cuz. WHGE 95.3 FM. Open eye. But somebody got fired yesterday. Yeah, I got a letter from her. Here it is. Hi, I'm former Attorney General Pam Bondi. I just got fired. And I wanted to say I'm not bitter. If I was, I'd say I was working for a senile, morbidly obese moron who smells because his bowels are as cooperative as a fruit monkey on speed. Does the president wear a diaper? I don't know. It depends. And why fired me? Why he fired me? Look at this retarded clown college he calls a cabinet. J.D. Vance. Hillbilly. Sofa screwer. He can't be president. He has a beard and facial hair and eyeline shadow. P. Hegseth. Drinky McF up, whose own mama say he trash. Hey, let's start World War III so people will forget about the Epstein files. Even Epstein knows that's crazy. He told me so yesterday. Excuse me. Kash Patel, FBI, now stands for effing bug-eyed idiot. In closing, it's been an honor ignoring the Constitution. Now I'm off to have lunch with Christy Nome. Sincerely, Pam Bondi, unemployed mean girl. Let me introduce you to a voice you may recognize. Hi, I'm former Attorney General Pam Bondi, just got fired. Not bitter at all. Yeah, because if she was bitter, she might say she worked for a man whose decision-making is as stable as a folding chair at a heavyweight convention. A man whose leadership style can best be described as improvisational chaos wrapped in a suit that's fighting for life and a bit smelly. But again, she's not bitter. Now, she's asking the question everyone in Washington whispers about, but nobody answers. Why her? Because when you look around that cabinet, and that's what we're calling it, you start to realize this wasn't about competence. Not at all. It's about casting. You got J.D. Vance, a man who went from writing memoirs about hardship to auditioning for loyalty like it's a full-time job. You got P, his mama said he trashed Hegseth, who treats geopolitics like it's a barroom debate 5 drinks too deep. And then there's Kash Patel, where law enforcement leadership starts sounding more like a late night punchline than a national responsibility. And Pam Bondi? Well, she thought she was part of a government. Turns out she was part of a production. Because what we're watching is not governance, it's theater. Vaudeville. A rotating cast of characters where loyalty outranks law, spectacle replaces substance, and chaos is mistaken for strength. And in that kind of environment, getting fired doesn't mean you fail. It just means your scene is over. So now she exits stage left, not bitter. Not bitter. Of course not. Just suddenly aware that the script she was reading was never about the Constitution in the first goddamn place. It was about power. And power in this production doesn't share the spotlight. Is it open eye? WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm Patrice Gibbs. This is the Open Eye. Okay. You know something, founding fathers were composing, putting together the U.S. Constitution. One of them stood up and said, you know what? Maybe we should put in some protection in case the people elect the effing idiot. You think? I mean, that's possible. He was, I don't think we're going to have to worry about that. I think the people are really that bad off. That's why we made it a government where the people hold the power. Yeah, but what if they mess around and elect the effing idiot? Well, they did. All right? And just over a year, 14 short months, the image of the United States has not merely declined, it's been redefined. Let's tell the truth the way it's never meant to be told. When the framers gathered in 1787 at the Constitutional Convention, they argued about tyranny, about kings, about concentrated power. They fear the monarch. They fear mobs. They fear chaos. But what they never fully accounted for was incompetence weaponized by power. They built a system to restrain ambition. They built a system to balance greed. They even built a system to slow down corruption. But they never truly built a system to stop a goddamn fool. Now, here we are. In just 14 months, not years, not decades, 14 months. The global image of the United States hasn't just slipped, it's been redefined. Once this country sold itself as the leader of the free world, now it's a cautionary tale. A nation that allies question, adversaries laugh at, and the rest of the world studies, not for inspiration, but for warning. Because power in the hands of the unqualified doesn't just mismanage, it destabilizes everything it touches. Diplomacy becomes theater. Strategy becomes improvisation. And truth becomes whatever is convenient at the moment. And this is what happens when spectacle replaces substance. See, the founders assumed wrongly that the weight of the office would shape the man. That the presidency would demand discipline, intelligence, and restraint. But what we learned is, well, the opposite is also true. The man can reshape the office. And when that man is reckless, the office becomes reckless. When that man is dishonest, truth itself becomes optional. When that man is small, the nation begins to shrink with him. And the world notices. Don't get it twisted. This isn't about politics. This is about perception, credibility, and power. Because on the global stage, reputation is currency. And right now, America is spending it like it's worthless. Agreement means less. Words carry less weight. Promises sound temporary. And once a nation loses credibility, it doesn't matter how strong its military is. It starts losing influence without firing a shot. And that's the real damage, not the headlines, not the speeches, not the chaos. The real damage is long-term. The erosion of trust, the weakening of alliances, and the quiet shift of global power away from a country that no longer feels stable or serious. The founders gave America checks and balances. They also gave America a dangerous assumption that the people would always choose wisely. History is correcting that assumption in real time, ain't it? Because democracy doesn't just reflect the will of the people, it exposes the judgment of the people. And when that judgment fails, the entire world feels it. This is the Open Eye. Patrice Gibbs. WHGE 95.3 FM, the Open Eye. Well, this is just moving right along. Was it F-15 shot down over Iran? Pardon me, I said I'm going to stop messing that country's name up. One of the pilots was rescued. The other one is still missing, maybe somewhere in Iran. I don't know. At this hour or this morning, it's been, he's been found. Well, Iran responds to Trump saying he will send Iran back to the Stone Age where they belong. Yeah, the orange idiot got up and said that. Listen, and listen carefully. Because what you are hearing right now is not just rhetoric. It's the sound of escalation dressed up as leadership. A U.S. president stands in front of the world and says he will send Iran back to the Stone Age. Think about that language. Not defeating an army, not containing a government, not negotiating an outcome. No, erase a society, cripple its infrastructure, collapse civilian life. That's not strategy. That's annihilation talk. And Iran's response was cold, precise, and surgical. It is you who are taking your soldiers to their graves. And then the dagger. With your paltry 250-year history, you threaten a civilization over 6,000 years old. Now stop right there. Because that wasn't just defiance, that was context. That was a reminder. This is not about a people talking tough. This is about a civilization with memory, invaded by Greeks, overrun by Arab conquest, shattered by Mongol hordes, manipulated by British imperial power, pressured, sanctioned, and encircled in the modern era, and yet still here. Still speaking its language, still carrying its identity, still standing. Now let's correct the narrative. This is not about a people who believe they cannot be destroyed. This is about a civilization that has refused to be destroyed by empires, by invasion, by occupation over and over again. That's not mythology. That's history. And when you threaten the people who see themselves that way, you are not issuing a warning. You're issuing a challenge. Now understand what that means. Because America speaks in the language of dominance, shock, awe, overwhelming force, total destruction. But Iran is speaking in the language of endurance, time, sacrifice, survival. And those are two completely different war doctrines. One tries to win quickly, the other is prepared to outlast you. So when you hear Stone Age threats, don't mistake that for strength. That's arrogance. And arrogance has buried empires before. Because wars like this don't end the way politicians describe them. They drag on. They expand. They consume. And the ones who pay the price are never the ones making the speeches. It's the young soldier sent into a conflict he didn't start. It's the civilian halfway across the world whose life is reduced to rubble in the name of strategy. So what are we really looking at here? Not just a war of weapons, but a collision between power that believes it can destroy anything and a civilization that history shows has endured everything thrown at it. And when those two forces meet, history doesn't whisper. It explodes. This is a quote from French Senator Claude Mohuret. Mohuret. Okay, Claude, French Senator Claude. He said, after assembling the most powerful army in the world, failing to win a war against the middle power, causing oil and gas prices to skyrocket, and delivering incoherent speeches, the golfer from Mar-a-Lago shamelessly admits to be stunned by the Iranian response, which was entirely predictable. And now calls for help from his allies, who he was insulting just yesterday. And they replied to him, "You didn't consult anyone, you have no plan, and we have no reason to follow you blindly into the fog." Trump, the only elephant in the world who walks around with his own China shop, now has no choice but between two equally bad options: to withdraw shamefully, pretending without convincing anyone that he has achieved his objectives, or to trigger escalation with results that have been known in advance since Vietnam, Iraq, or Afghanistan. A quagmire, and in the end, a disgraceful departure, leaving the field open at the time to the communists, to Daesh, and to the Taliban. That was French Senator Claude Mohoret. Let's be clear here. What Mohoret just delivered isn't diplomacy. That was a public autopsy. This is what it sounds like when the rest of the world stops whispering about American dysfunction and starts saying it out loud. Because at the center of that statement is a devastating truth about Donald Trump. Power without strategy is not strength, it's spectacle. And that spectacle is now global. You assemble the most powerful military apparatus on earth, trillions of dollars, decades of technological dominance, and then you run headfirst into a nation like Iran, a country that survived empires, sanctions, assassinations, and isolation, and you act surprised when they don't fold. That's not miscalculation. That's arrogance masquerading policy. Mohoret's metaphor cuts deep. The elephant in the China shop. But here's the part that matters. The elephant isn't just clumsy, it's blind to consequence. Because what we're watching is a pattern America has already lived through. Vietnam War. Overwhelming force, no political understanding, exit and humiliation. Iraq War, mission accomplished, followed by years of chaos. War in Afghanistan, 20 years, trillions spent, and the same goddamn people back in power. And yet, here we are again, rehearsing the same script like history is optional. What makes this woman more dangerous is not just the military gamble, it's the diplomatic collapse. Listen closely to what Mohoret said. America no longer leads by consensus. America no longer leads by consensus. It lunges and then looks around asking, who with me? At this time, the answer is silence. Allies, once automatic, are now skeptical. Y'all know what I'm saying, skeptical. Can't get that word out. Not because they're weak, because they're tired of being dragged into conflicts that begin with impulse and end with denial. That line, you didn't consult anyone and you had no plan. That's not just criticism, that's isolation. And isolation for a global power is more dangerous than any enemy abroad. Now look at the fork in the road. Option 1, declare victory, walk away, and hope the headlines hold long enough for people to forget the reality. Option 2, escalate, knowing full well where that road leads. Not uncertainty, not mystery, history. Because every one of those wars Malhuret named didn't end in triumph. They ended in erosion of credibility, of resources, of lies, and of truth. And here's the coldest part of the entire commentary. The world is no longer shocked by America making mistakes they expected. That's the shift. From fear to doubt to dismissal. And this isn't just about one man. It's about what happens when a nation confuses dominance with wisdom and finds out too late that they are not the same thing. Because military power can force a battlefield, but it cannot force an outcome. And if history has taught us anything from Vietnam to Kabul, it's this. You don't stumble into quagmires. You march into them convinced you're too powerful to sink. And that's what happens when the founders didn't put in a clause to guard against the people electing a fucking idiot. This is the open eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. Did y'all hear about the woman that hired Guatemalans to fix her roof or whatever it was, the repairs done on her house? And then that no good ass hussy called ICE instead of paying them the $10,000 she owed them. Yeah, well, it didn't work out. Because they locked her sorry ass up for exploiting illegal immigrants or exploiting workers. And she didn't want to pay the money. She planned that all along. Yeah. ICE took them though. Yeah, I caught this online. Not sure who is it. Volition Maximus. They said, today I learned ICE is financially incentivized to let people die in custody. Each center gets a flat rate for medical care. So every skipped exam, prescription, and operation is money they get to keep. The ACLU found that 95% of deaths in ICE detentions were preventable if medical care had been provided. 43 people that we know of have died in the last 15 months. Profits are up 700%. Hey, Rhonda, I see you. This is not mismanagement. This is a system where neglect becomes profitable. Here's the part that should stop everybody cold. If a detention system is structured so that every untreated illness saves money, then suffering isn't a failure of the system. It becomes part of the business model. You telling me that under U.S. immigration and customs enforcement detention contracts, facilities receive a flat rate for medical care, meaning the less they spend, the more they keep. That flips the moral equation upside down. Healthcare, which should be about preservation of life, becomes a line item to be minimized. And we had to find this from the American Civil Liberties Union, that 95% of those deaths were preventable. Not unfortunate, not unpredictable, preventable. The word carries weight, because preventable means there was a moment, probably many moments, where someone could have intervened and didn't. 43 people that we know of, and I say it that way because you know these reports are low. 43 people that we know of died, deaths that were preventable. Ask yourself, is this what happened in any other system, schools, hospitals, even prisons, where U.S. citizens? Would it be tolerated? Or would we call it what it is? Negligence at scale. Now add the part about profits increasing 700%. That's not a coincidence. That's a correlation that demands scrutiny. Because when death rates and profit margins move in the same direction, you're no longer looking at isolated failures. You're looking at incentives doing exactly what they were designed to do. And that's the deeper issue. This isn't about one bad facility or one bad decision maker. It's about structure that quietly asks a question no civilized society should ever tolerate. What is a human life worth on a balance sheet? Because once the answer becomes less than the cost of treatment, you cross from policy into something far more dangerous. A system that saves money by withholding care is not broken. It's functioning exactly as designed. And that should disturb everyone, regardless of where you stand on immigration. Because the measure of a system isn't how it treats powerful. It's how it treats the people with no power at all. Moving right along. Yeah, I'll go a little over here. Generals fired for not wanting to put troops in Iran under Hegseth. I'm trying. Iran. I'm trying. Joint Chiefs, top military leadership, C.Q. Brown Jr., chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, removed. New York Post Navy leadership, Lisa Franchetti, Chief of Naval Operations, fired. Fred Kocher, Director of the Joint Staff, removed. Military legal leadership, Judge Advocate Generals, Charles L. Plummer, Air Force top lawyer. Joseph B. Berger III, Army top lawyer, removed. Something's shifting. It's not subtle. You're starting to see, when you're starting to see the removal of top military leadership, not one, not two, but across multiple branches, you are no longer looking at routine turnover. You are looking at pressure being applied to the spine of the military itself. I named the positions. Joint Chief of Staff, Chief of Navy, Director Joint Chief of Staff, and top military legal authorities. Think about that. If you remove the lawyers, if you replace the advisors, if you clear out the experienced command structure, what you're left with is not a stronger military. You are left with a more compliant one. And history has already written that script. And not in theory, in reality. When political leaders begin to reshape military leadership around loyalty instead of judgment, wars don't become successful. They become more reckless. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, because war is the one place yes men get people killed. And let's deal with the Iran question directly. Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not Afghanistan. Iran is a regional power with deep history, strategic alliances, and the capacity to turn any conflict into a prolonged, multi-front disaster. Anyone in uniform who understands war at a serious level knows that. So senior leadership hesitates. If they question escalation, that is not weakness. That is professional responsibility. And that's exactly what you want from people who understand the cost of war is not measured in speeches, but in body bags. So the real question becomes, are leaders removed because they fail or because they refuse to say yes? Because if it's the second, then what you're watching is not strength. It's the quiet, dangerous transformation of the military from an institution of strategy into an instrument of ego. And once that line is crossed, history tells them something else. It doesn't end with one decision. It doesn't end with one conflict. It becomes a pattern where dissent is disloyalty, where caution is weakness, where obedience matters more than outcome. And when that happens, the greatest threat is no longer the enemy overseas. The greatest threat becomes decision making at the top that no one is allowed to challenge. And that's how nations stumble into wars they can't win, can't explain, and can't undo. And by the time the truth becomes deniable, it's already too late. I'm Patrice Gibbs. WHGE 95.3 FM, the Open Eye. I'm Patrice Gibbs, and we're going to move right on along here. And change direction some. I'll talk to you in today's show with the sound of liberation. The black poets of the 1960s and 70s, they're not merely write, they declare war on silence. Emerging from the twin fires of the civil rights movement and the black arts movement, these poets forged a language that refused compromise, rejected assimilation, and demanded that black people see themselves not as subjects of history, but as its authors. This was not poetry for polite audiences. This was poetry as confrontation, poetry as liberation, poetry as a weapon. And let me tell you something, my children of the sun. There was a time in this country when poetry wasn't something you snap your fingers to in a quiet cafe. Poetry was dangerous. Poetry could get you watched. Poetry could actually get you followed. And poetry could get you killed. In the 60s and 70s, out of the fire and the civil rights movement and the rise of black power came something unapologetically black, unapologetically revolutionary, the black arts movement. And at the center stood warriors with words. Amiri Baraka didn't write poetry to entertain you. He wrote to wake you up. After 1965, his work became a call to arms. He said, black art must serve black people, period. day. Nikki Giovanni, she gave us black feeling, black talk, raw, direct, unfiltered truth, love, struggle, pride, all of it without apology. This wasn't about art for art's sake. This was about liberation. This was about controlling our image, our narrative, our voice. The Black Arts Movement was the cultural arm of Black power. It said we don't need permission to define ourselves. And then the poetry left the page and it hit the speakers. Gil Scott-Heron, self-described bluesologist, stood up and told America the revolution will not be televised. That wasn't just a poem. That was a warning. A warning that freedom wouldn't come through commercials or politicians or primetime programming. It was going to come through struggle, through awareness, through action. And then came the last poets, born in Harlem on the birthday of Malcolm X. No instruments, no orchestra, just drums and truth. They spoke about black identity, oppression, revolution, and they spoke so clearly, so powerfully, that the federal government took notice. You heard me right. COINTELPRO put the radar on the last poets. Why? Because when black people start telling the truth about power, power gets nervous. See, what these poets did, what these artists did, they took poetry out of the classroom and put it in the street. And they made it impossible to ignore. They laid the foundation for what we now call hip-hop. Before there was rap, there was revolution, set the rhythm. And here's the question, what happened to that voice? What happened to that fire? Because once upon a time, black art didn't ask for acceptance. It demanded transformation. So what happened to that voice? That voice that spoke without fear. That voice that didn't ask permission. That voice that told the truth even when the truth was dangerous. I'm going to tell you what happened. It didn't disappear. It evolved. It echoes in X-Clan with that Afrocentric fire. Those red, black, and green frequencies reminding us that culture is power. It roared through Public Enemy. Fight the Power wasn't just a song, it was a directive. A sonic blueprint for resistance. And today it breathes through Kendrick Lamar. Layered, complex, unapologetic, forcing a generation to confront itself in the mirror. Same spirit, different beat. See, the medium changed, but the message is still trying to break through the noise. The real question is not what happened to that voice. The real question is, are we still listening? Are we still listening? See, and considering, go ahead, NASA going back to the moon. Old poopy drawers, dumpy drawers. In the latest budget was $1.5 trillion. Can you even fathom that? But God right up and said, we ain't got money for Medicare. We don't have money for Medicaid, infrastructure. The states can take care of that. You know, maybe we'll cut some taxes. Cut some, God be damned. Cut some taxes. And that's why that poetry, that's why that poetry is still relevant. Gil Scott-Heron. A rat then bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the moon. Her face and arms began to swell, and Whitey's on the moon. I can't pay no doctor bills, but Whitey's on the moon. 10 years from now, I'll be paying still while Whitey's on the moon. The man just upped my rent last night because Whitey's on the moon. No hot water, no toilets, no lights, but Whitey's on the moon. I wonder why he's upping me, because Whitey's on the moon. Well, I was already giving him $50 a week with Whitey on the moon. Taxes taking my whole damn check. Junkies making me a nervous wreck. The price of food is going up. And if all that shit wasn't enough, a rat that bit my sister Nell. And Whitey's on the moon. Was all that money I made last year for Whitey on the moon? How come I ain't got no money here? Whitey's on the moon. You know, I just about had my fill of Whitey on the moon. I think I'll send these doctor bills. Air, mail, special. To Whitey on the moon. WHGE 95.3. All right. So, coming around to the close here. Oh, here we are. Not at the edge of confusion, but in the middle of revelation. Because what we are seeing is not random. It's not accidental. It's what power looks like when it stops asking for permission. When it realizes that contradiction won't be punished, that outrage won't be sustained, that memory is short and attention is shorter. That's when the mask comes off. And once the mask comes off, it rarely goes back on. So the question is no longer, what are they doing? The question is, are we willing to recognize? Because recognition is the first act of resistance. Not slogans, not hashtags, not monetary outrage, clarity. The ability to see a thing as it is, not as it's presented. Because if you can see clearly, you can think clearly. And if you can think clearly, you cannot be easily controlled. And that is always where the battle is. Not just over land, not just over policy, but over perception. Who gets to define reality and who accepts it without question. So as you move through your day, don't just consume what's happening, interrogate it. Because the moment you stop asking questions is the moment someone else starts answering them for you. I hope you learned something today, because I learned something before I got here. And as we always tell you, destiny determines who enters your life, but you decide who stays. Therefore, value those who value you, and don't treat those as a priority. You treat you as an option. This is the Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm Patrice Gibbs. Thanks for joining me. All right. As I always tell you, global African supremacy. Go home. Peace.